The results of this study, in which the participants played the games for just 8 minutes, indicate that even for a short amount of time, antisocial or violent video games can have a slight negative impact on a person's social being, while video games that are more social do not necessarily harm a person's social well-being due to the content of the games.
The nature of a person to exhibit prosocial behavior cannot be directly linked to a prosocial video game, as their behaviors are also influenced by traits they have already developed. That being said, the same goes for antisocial and violent video games, but a negative effect may be more noticeable in a person that plays violent video games.
Another study looked at how video games create schemes. The way people, in their minds, like to imagine the world and how it works, but these are often not reality. The study also mentions that video games where the player must move the controller around to imitate actions in the game can have a more harmful effect on the player when playing violent video games, because he or she is actually following the motion of that particular action, whereas using a traditional video game controller only requires the player to push buttons, making the gameplay less realistic. However, one thing that lacks in most studies is someone whose name is No, but really, one thing that lacks in most studies is finding whether or not increased hostile or violent behavior that leads to criminal activity is in fact related to violent video games.
What has been observed in studies, though, is that violent video games lead to more hostility within a person, but as previously mentioned, this does not mean the studies conclude that the violence in the games is the cause of extremely violent behavior in a criminal form.
So while the jury is still out on whether or not antisocial or violent video games can be to blame for criminal acts, one thing about these games is known: they have a higher chance of making a person express violent or antisocial behavior, the latter demonstrated with the pin drop test. Video games as a whole, though, are not harmful to the brain, as prosocial video games and games with multiple players can be beneficial to one's social being.